Hey, everybody. For today's recording of Esperanza Rising, I have a guest. This is Tootsie, taking care of my friend's dog, and she doesn't like it when I am ignoring her and talking to my computer. So I apologize in advance for any woofs or cuteness that distracts us from the story. So we were about halfway through chapter 3 last week, and there had just been a terrible fire at the vineyard and at their house. And during that fire, Esperanza's grandmother, Abuelita, had hurt her ankle. And after the fire, Abuelita and Esperanza's mother were staying with their friends who were some people who worked on their farm. So they're staying with Hortensia and Alfonso and Miguel. So we're going to find out now what happens next. And you'll notice that I have some pictures today that are new. So there's this old wagon that would be pulled by some horses. And then there's two pictures that are examples of some old trains. And then we have two different dolls here. So as we move through chapter 3 and into chapter 4, we're going to be learning through Esperanza's story about some different ways that they're traveling. And then this doll down here in the corner is an example of like the porcelain doll that Esperanza's father gave her for her birthday. And there's also going to be a moment where a doll like this, a yarn doll, comes up in the story. So I included some pictures to help you better understand what we're reading about. The next day, Abuelita's sisters came for her in a wagon. The nuns, dressed in their black and white habits, gently lifted Abuelita into the back. They pulled a blanket under her chin, and Esperanza went to her and held her hand. She remembered the night that Alfonso and Miguel brought Papa home in the wagon. How long ago was that? She knew that it had only been a few weeks, but it seemed like many lifetimes ago. Esperanza tenderly hugged and kissed Abuelita. Mi nieta, we won't be able to communicate. The mail is unpredictable, and I'm sure your uncles will be watching my correspondence. But I will come, of that you can be certain. While you're waiting, finish this for me. She handed Esperanza the bundle of crocheting. Look at the zigzag of the blanket, mountains and valleys. Right now, you are in the bottom of the valley and your problems loom big before you. But soon you will be at the top of a mountain again. After you have lived many mountains and valleys, we will be together. Through her tears, Esperanza said, Please get well. Please come to us. I promise. And you promise to take care of Mama for me. Next, it was Mama's turn. Esperanza could not watch. She buried her head in Hortensia's shoulder until she heard the wagon pulling away. Then she went to Mama and put her arms around her. They watched the wagon disappear down the path until it was a speck in the distance, until even the dust was gone. That's when Esperanza noticed the old trunk with the leather straps that the nuns had left. What is in that trunk? She asked. Our papers to travel, and clothes from the poor box at the convent. The poor box? People donate them, said Mama, for others who cannot afford to buy their own. Mama, at a time like this, must we worry about some poor family who needs clothes? Esperanza, said Mama, we have little money, and Hortensia, Alfonso, and Miguel are no longer our servants. We are indebted to them for our finances and our future. And that trunk of clothes for the poor? Esperanza, it is for us. Senor Rodriguez was the only person they could trust. He came after dark for secret meetings, always carrying a basket of figs for the grieving family to disguise his real reason for visiting. Esperanza fell asleep each night on a blanket on the floor, listening to the adults' hushed voices and mysterious plans, and smelling the plentiful piles of white figs that she knew would never be eaten. At the end of the week, Esperanza was sitting on the small step to Hortensia and Alfonso's cabin when Tio Luis rode up. He remained on his horse and sent Alfonso to bring Mama. In a few moments, Mama walked toward them, drying her hands on her apron. She held her head high and looked beautiful, even dressed in the old clothes from the poor box. Luis, I have considered your proposal, and in the interest of the servants and Esperanza, I will marry you in due time. But you must begin replanting and rebuilding immediately, as the servants need their jobs. Esperanza was quiet and stared at the dirt, hiding the smirk on her face. Tio Luis could not contain his grin. He sat up straighter. I knew you would come to your senses, Ramona. I will announce the engagement at once. Mama nodded, almost bowing. One more thing, she said. We will need a wagon to visit Abuelita. She is in the convent at La Purísima. I must see to her every few weeks. I will send one over this afternoon, said Tio Luis, smiling. A new one. And those clothes, Ramona. They're not fitting for a woman of your stature. And Esperanza looks like a waif. I will send a dressmaker next week with new fabrics. In the nicest way possible, Esperanza looked up and said, Thank you, Tio Luis. I am happy that you will be taking care of us. Yes, of course, he said, not even glancing at her. Esperanza smiled at him anyway, because she knew she would never spend a night in the same house as him, and he would never be her stepfather. She almost wished she would be able to see his face when he realized that they had escaped. He wouldn't be grinning like a proud rooster then. The night before the dressmaker was scheduled to come, Mama woke Esperanza in the middle of the night, and they left with only what they could carry. Esperanza had a valise filled with clothes, a small package of tamales, and her doll from Papa. She and Mama and Hortensia were wrapped in dark shawls to blend in with the night. They could not take a chance walking on the roads, so Miguel and Alfonso led them through the grape rows, weaving across Papa's land toward the Rodriguez ranch. There was enough moonlight that they could see the outlines of the twisted and charred trunks, the burnt-out vines rolling in parallel lines towards the mountains. It looked as if someone had taken a giant comb, dipped it in black paint, and gently swirled it across a huge canvas. They reached the fig orchard that separated Papa's land from Señor Rodriguez's. Alfonso, Hortensia, and Miguel walked ahead, but Esperanza held back and pulled on Mama's hand to keep her there for a moment. They turned to look at what used to be El Rancho de las Rosas in the distance. Sadness and anger tangled in Esperanza's stomach as she thought of all that she was leaving, her friends and her school, her life as it once was, Abuelita, and Papa. She felt as though she was leaving him too. As if reading her mind, Mama said, Papa's heart will find us wherever we go. Then Mama took a determined breath and headed toward the sprawling trees. Esperanza followed, but hesitated every few steps looking back. She hated leaving, but how could she stay? With each stride, Papa's land became smaller and smaller. She hurried after Mama, knowing that she might never come back to her home again, and her heart filled with venom for Tio Luis. When she turned around one last time, she could see nothing but a trail of splattered figs she had resentfully smashed beneath her feet. Chapter 4. Las Guavas. They emerged from the fig orchard and continued through a pear grove. When they came into a clearing, they saw Señor Rodriguez waiting with the lantern by the barn doors. They hurried inside. Pigeons fluttered in the rafters. Their wagon was waiting, surrounded by crates of green guavas. Did Marisol come? Asked Esperanza, her eyes searching the barn. I could tell no one of your departure, said Señor Rodriguez. When the time is right, I will tell her that you looked for her and said goodbye. Now, we must hurry. You need the protection of darkness. Alfonso, Miguel, and Señor Rodriguez had built another floor in the wagon, higher than the real one and open in the back, with barely enough room between for Mama, Esperanza, and Hortensia to lie down. Hortensia lined it with blankets. Esperanza had known the plan, but now she hesitated when she saw the small space. Please, can I sit with Alfonso and Miguel? Mija, it is necessary, said Mama. There are too many bandits, said Alfonso. It is not safe for women to be on the roads at night. Besides, your uncles have many spies. Remember, that is why we must take the wagons to Zacatecas and catch the train there instead of from Aguascalientes. Luis has bragged about the engagement to everyone, said Hortensia. Think of how angry he will be when he discovers you've gone. We cannot take the chance of you being seen. Mama and Hortensia said grateful goodbyes to Senor Rodriguez, then slid between the floors of the wagon. Esperanza reluctantly scooted on her back between them. When can we get out? Every few hours we will stop and stretch, said Mama. Esperanza stared at the wood planks just a few inches from her face. She could hear Alfonso and Miguel and Senor Rodriguez dumping crate after crate of guavas onto the floor above them, the almost ripe fruit rolling and tumbling as it was piled on. The guavas smelled fresh and sweet, like pears and oranges all in one. Then she felt the guavas roll in around her feet as Alfonso and Miguel covered the opening. If anyone saw the wagon on the road, it would look like a farmer and his son taking a load of fruit to the market. How are you? Alfonso asked, sounding far away. We are fine, called Hortensia. The wagon pulled out of the barn and the guavas shifted, then settled. It was dark inside, and it felt like someone was rocking them in a bumpy cradle, sometimes side to side and sometimes back and forth. Esperanza began to feel frightened. She knew that with a few kicks of her feet she could get out, but still she felt trapped. Suddenly, she thought she couldn't breathe. Mama, she asked, gasping for air. Right here, Esperanza. Everything is fine. Do you remember, said Hortensia, taking her hand, when you were only 5 years old and we hid from the thieves? You were so brave for such a little girl. Your parents and Alfonso and the other servants had gone to town. It was just you and me and Miguel in the house. We were in your bedroom, and I was pinning the hem of your beautiful blue silk dress. Do you remember that dress? You wanted it pinned higher so your new shoes would show. Esperanza's eyes were beginning to adjust to the darkness and to the pitch and roll of the wagon. Miguel ran into the house because he had seen bandits, said Esperanza, exhaling. She remembered standing on a chair with her arms outstretched like a bird ready for flight while Hortensia fitted the sides of the dress. And she remembered the new shoes, shiny and black. Yes, said Hortensia. I looked out the window to see 6 men, their faces covered with handkerchiefs, and they all held rifles. They were renegades who thought they had permission to steal from the rich and give to the poor. But they didn't always give to the poor, and sometimes they killed innocent people. We hid under the bed, said Esperanza, and we pulled down the bed covers so they couldn't see us. She remembered staring straight up at the bedboards, much like the boards enclosing them in the wagon now. She took another deep breath. What we didn't know was that Miguel had a big field mouse in his pocket, said Hortensia. Yes, he was going to scare me with it, said Esperanza. The wagon creaked and swayed. They could hear Alfonso and Miguel murmuring above them. The persistent smell of the guavas filled their noses. Esperanza relaxed a little. Hortensia continued. The men came into the house, and we could hear them opening cupboards and stealing the silver. Then we heard them climb the stairs. 2 men came into the bedroom, and we saw their big boots through a crack in the bed cover. But we didn't say a word. Until a pin poked me, and I moved my leg and made a noise. I was so frightened they would find us, said Hortensia. But Miguel pushed the mouse out from under the bed, and it ran around the room. The men were startled, but started laughing, and then one of them said, It was just a raton. We've got plenty. Let's go. And they left, said Esperanza. Mama said, They took almost all the silver, but Papa and I only cared that you were safe. Do you remember how Papa said that Miguel was very smart and brave and asked him what he wanted for protecting you, his most prized possession? Esperanza remembered. Miguel wanted to go on a train ride. Hortensia started to hum softly, and Mama held Esperanza's hand. Miguel's reward, that day-long train ride to Zacatecas, seemed like yesterday. Miguel had been 8 and Esperanza 5. She wore the beautiful silk dress and could still see Miguel standing at the station wearing a bow tie and practically shining as if Hortensia had cleaned and starched his entire body. Even his hair was slicked down, smooth, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. He was mesmerized by the locomotive, watching it slowly pull in. Esperanza had been excited too. When the train arrived, all sputtering and blustery, porters had hurried to escort them, showing them the way to their car. Papa took her hand and Miguel's, and they boarded, waving goodbye to Alfonso and Hortensia. The compartment had seats of soft leather, and she and Miguel had bounced happily upon them. Later, they ate dinner in the dining cart, at little tables covered in white linens and set with silver and crystal. When the waiter came and asked if there was anything he could bring them, Esperanza said, "Yes, please bring dinner now." The men and women dressed in their hats and fancy clothes smiled and chuckled at what must have looked like a doting father and 2 privileged children. When they arrived in Zacatecas, the woman wrapped in a colorful rebozo, a blanket shawl, boarded the train selling mangoes on a stick. The mangoes were peeled and carved to look like exotic flowers. Papa bought one for each of them. On the return ride, she and Miguel, with their noses pressed against the window and their hands still sticky from the fresh mango, had waved to every person they saw. The wagon jostled them now as it hit a hole in the road. Esperanza wished she could get to Zacatecas as fast as she had on the day the train, instead of traveling on back roads hidden in a slow wagon. By this time, she was buried beneath a mountain of guavas and could not wave to anyone. There was no comfort, and there was no Papa. Tune in next week to hear the continuation of their travel and to find out what happens next as they're making their way north to the United States. Say bye to Toots. Tootsie! Tootsie! Okay, bye, Toots.